The Eternal Dominion's first contact with humanity was not a grand affair. There were no diplomatic envoys, no elaborate ceremonies, no pretenses of peace. There was simply the cold, dispassionate assessment of a civilization deemed unworthy. From the moment Dominion scout ships identified the existence of Earth and its scattered colonies, the outcome was inevitable. The Dominion had seen this pattern unfold countless times before. A young, ambitious species, bound to its homeworld, desperately clawing for the stars. Their technological progress, while notable in the microcosm of their own existence, was laughable on the galactic stage. Their culture, diverse and chaotic, lacked the efficiency and singular purpose that true empire-building required. Their biology, flesh, bone, and a primitive reliance on atmospheric respiration, rendered them fragile compared to the engineered and evolved forms of more advanced races. The Dominion had classified thousands of species before, and they categorized humans as Lesser Type 5, a species with moderate intelligence but insufficient biological, technological, or societal strength to contribute anything meaningful to the greater empire. In any other age, the Dominion would have simply eradicated them. The vast galactic order had no patience for weaklings who threatened to dilute its purity. But extermination had proven wasteful. Wiping out species en masse left economic voids, disrupted supply chains, and created rebellions among those who feared they might be next. No, a far more efficient system had been developed long ago: the trial of endurance. It was a test as ancient as the Dominion itself, a form of judgment imposed on any species deemed too weak to integrate naturally. The rules were simple: survive. If the species could endure the trials set before them, they would earn a place, however minor, in the Dominion's hierarchy. None ever did. From the colossal halls of the Prime Nexus, the Dominion's governing body convened to officially decide the fate of humanity. The Exarch, the supreme ruler of the Dominion, presided over the assembly, flanked by the cold, unreadable faces of the High Ministers. Species 7421-3, an adjudicator droned, referring to humanity in the official numerical designation assigned to all discovered races. Lesser Type 5, probability of long-term contribution, negligible. Probability of resistance, moderate. Recommended action, trial of endurance. A murmur rippled through the assembly, though not one of debate. This was all routine. The only question was how quickly humanity would collapse. Objections? The Exarch's voice rang through the chamber. Silence. Then it is decided. Initiate the trial immediately. Let them prove their worth or fade into nothingness. With a gesture, the fate of an entire species was sealed. The trial of endurance had many methods, all designed to shatter a species in the most effective way possible. The Dominion had perfected its approach over thousands of years, studying exactly what drove civilizations to their breaking point. For humanity, the chosen method was exile. In a matter of months, Dominion forces descended upon Earth and its colonies with terrifying efficiency. They did not come with the firepower of an extermination fleet. There was no need. Their technology was so vastly superior that even Earth's most advanced military systems registered them as anomalies before being overridden entirely. Massive displacement ships arrived in orbit, their sheer scale eclipsing any human-built construct. Then came the extractions. Entire cities were rounded up, selected at random to be torn from their homes and transported to the unknown. Soldiers and civilians alike were stripped of their weapons, stripped of their technology, stripped of everything but the clothing on their backs. Each human was injected with a biological tracking marker, not to control them, but to observe them. The trial was not about interference. The Dominion would simply watch as humanity destroyed itself. Then, the transports opened their hangars and released the first wave of humans onto their new homes. The Dominion had chosen well. These are not simply uninhabitable worlds. They were graveyards. Some were dry, lifeless rocks with no atmosphere. Some were frozen wastelands, their surfaces covered in ice sheets thicker than Earth's oceans. Others were toxic Hell's Capes, with air so corrosive that even Dominion scouting drones deteriorated within hours. There were no resources, no food, no water, no shelter. The expectation was clear. Humanity would starve, suffocate, or freeze. For most species, that was exactly what happened. From their observation stations, the Dominion analysts recorded the initial responses of the humans. At first, it was predictable. Panic, despair, riots among the survivors. The weak fell within the first days, unable to cope with the sudden loss of civilization. Groups splintered, fighting over whatever scraps they could find. The Dominion observers nodded to themselves. This is how it always began. The species turned on itself, consuming itself in the chaos, until the inevitable collapse. Some would last weeks, the strongest months. A handful, perhaps a year or two, but all would break eventually. And then something changed. The analysts noticed an irregularity in the data. Human behavior wasn't following the expected pattern. Yes, there had been initial collapse. That was normal. But then, instead of spiraling into extinction, the survivors began organizing. On a planet of endless ice, where Dominion scholars predicted total extinction within 3 months, humans began constructing subterranean shelters, carving deep into the frozen wastelands to escape the deadly cold. They found ways to generate heat by igniting underground mineral deposits. They constructed insulation out of woven plant fibers scavenged from rare, underground flora. On a planet with an unbreathable atmosphere, Dominion drones observed unprecedented adaptation. Humans learned to create makeshift filtration systems using salvage materials. They found subterranean air pockets and cultivated oxygen-producing bacteria within them. Even more troubling, on a desert world with no water, humans found ways to extract moisture from the very air itself, setting up vast condensation systems within mere months. The observers were perplexed. This is not expected behavior. One of them murmured, scrolling through the data. Another scoffed. It is an anomaly. The collapse will come. But it didn't. Months passed. Instead of dying, the humans began thriving. They developed new societal structures, ones optimized for endurance, where the strong protected the weak and innovation was rewarded. They shared knowledge at unprecedented speeds, learning from each other's mistakes in real time. They were adapting faster than any species the Dominion had ever observed. And for the first time in its long history, the Dominion felt something it never had before. Doubt. Humanity was supposed to fail. The Dominion had seen it before. Species tossed into the crucible of the trial of endurance only to crumble within months, their broken remnants either forgotten or absorbed into the empire as servile underlings. The methodology was foolproof. Place a civilization in an environment they were never meant to survive, deprive them of tools, infrastructure, and hope, and let the weight of reality break them. The expectation was simple. Humanity would collapse into infighting, starvation, and despair, like all the others before them. And at first they did. The initial weeks were carnage. The Dominion's observation drones recorded the predictable chaos. The barren worlds where humanity had been exiled, some arid wastelands devoid of water, others frozen hells where exposure meant death in minutes, were indifferent to their suffering. Cities have been replaced with endless dunes of lifeless dust, deep canyons of rock that would never yield crops, mountains that provided no shelter from the merciless storms that howled across the land. Scattered across these death worlds, entire communities fought for survival in the way all sentient creatures did when confronted with imminent doom. People turned on each other in desperation, the weak falling first, the unprepared perishing within days. Hunger and thirst became constant companions. Madness took those who could not cope. The Dominion analysts watched with quiet satisfaction. The trial was proceeding as expected. Within 3 months, extinction was the inevitable conclusion. But then something happened. The first sign that humanity was not like the others came not from an act of strength, but an act of sheer defiance. On an ice world where the surface temperature never rose above -60 degrees, the drones recorded something unusual: movement underground. At first, it was dismissed as the final death throes of a desperate species, pockets of survivors making their last futile attempts to dig into the permafrost for shelter. The Dominion had seen this before. Desperation often mimicked ingenuity, but it always ended the same way. Except it didn't. The humans did not simply hide in the frozen earth. They transformed it. They dug deeper, creating insulated caverns where body heat was trapped and shared, turning what should have been a slow, freezing death into the first step of a new kind of survival. Then they built, using scavenged materials from the clothes on their backs, the few possessions they had been allowed to keep, and the bones of the fallen. In time, they uncovered something the Dominion had not considered: a buried network of glacial tunnels filled with microbial life that, against all probability, contained chemical compounds capable of generating minimal heat when catalyzed. It was a discovery that should have taken decades of research. The humans figured it out in weeks. And on the desert worlds, the Dominion drones expected nothing but death. Yet in the wastelands, something unprecedented was occurring. Humans, in the absence of water, created it. They crafted wind traps and condensers from shattered remnants of Dominion supply crates, channeling the planet's minuscule humidity into collection points. They dug trenches at night, where the ground's rare moisture surfaced in thin layers of morning dew. When that wasn't enough, they resorted to methods so insane they should not have worked: burning the very flesh of their own dead to extract every last drop of moisture before the bodies turned to dust. Madness? Yes, but effective. And the Dominion took notice. Even in the most hostile conditions, humanity did not merely survive. They innovated. By the time the Dominion realized that humanity was not breaking, but adapting, it was too late to correct the mistake. Survival was no longer a question of individual willpower. It had become strategy. Humans established underground shelters in complex networks, turning their barren worlds into subterranean cities within months. They divided themselves into castes not of power, but of function. The strong became protectors, the wise became teachers, the skilled became builders. There was no wasted effort, no misplaced purpose. It was as if, in facing their own annihilation, humans had cast aside the divisions that once defined them and had become something else entirely, something the Dominion had never accounted for. And then came the firestorm. On one particular planet, a volcanic world where Dominion analysts had predicted a complete species-wide death within 1 year, the drones recorded something unprecedented. The humans had harnessed the planet's geothermal activity. Instead of avoiding the lava flows, they used them, channeling heat through stone for warmth, cooking, and even primitive energy generation. They crafted tools from volcanic rock, created filters to separate toxic elements from the air, and even established trade among different factions using credits of survival, bartering not with money, but with life-giving resources. In mere decades, they had become self-sufficient. The Dominion's expectations have been shattered. Survival alone would have been impressive, but this was thriving. And the Dominion made its next mistake. It underestimated how fast humans learned. The first act of true rebellion was small. A Dominion observation drone was discovered in the wreckage of an old supply pod. Instead of destroying it, the humans took it apart, analyzing its inner workings. Within weeks, they had built their own crude communication devices, piggybacking on Dominion frequencies in ways no other species had ever attempted. Suddenly, isolated human colonies across different worlds began communicating, sharing tactics, knowledge, and innovation at a speed that should have been impossible. Then, the second act of rebellion came. A trade network, illegal, underground, and entirely human-run, began to flourish, smuggling supplies between settlements using repurposed Dominion technology. Small at first, primitive, but growing. By the time the Dominion realized that humanity was not dying, but evolving, it was too late to stop them. What had once been separate, struggling groups of survivors had become something greater. A unified force, not bound by a single leader, but by a singular drive. A will that could not be broken. a flame that refused to be extinguished. The trial of endurance had claimed thousands of species before. It was a system so perfect that the Dominion had never once questioned its effectiveness. But humanity was not like the others. They endured, and in doing so, they had done what no species had ever done before. They had turned the trial into a crucible and emerged from the flames stronger than the Dominion had ever imagined. The Dominion had never encountered a species like humanity. Survival was expected in some cases, rare, but not unprecedented. A handful of civilizations had managed to prolong their extinction for a few decades, eking out a pitiful existence before succumbing to the inevitable. But adapting, innovating, thriving? That was unheard of. And yet, humanity was doing just that. They had built shelters in the ice, created water from barren deserts, tamed fire from volcanic hellscapes. But the Dominion was an empire that spanned thousands of worlds, a civilization whose reach was unchallenged. The trial of endurance had been designed to break civilizations not just through physical suffering, but through the erosion of the mind. And so, the next phase of the trial began. If humanity would not be broken by hardship, then they would be broken by doubt. It started subtly. The isolation program. The humans had found ways to communicate across their exiled worlds, crude though their methods were. They repurposed Dominion salvage, built rudimentary relay systems, and even created networks of runners, couriers who carried messages between settlements despite the overwhelming dangers. The Dominion shut it all down. One by one, the Dominion deployed countermeasures, jamming signals, intercepting couriers, disrupting supply lines between settlements with environmental disturbances. They introduced fabricated messages into human communications, injecting false information to breed confusion and mistrust. Colony leaders received forged transmissions claiming that other groups had betrayed them, hoarded supplies, or conspired to seize control. Others were led to believe that there were Dominion sympathizers among them, feeding their captors information. And the Dominion watched, waiting for humanity to tear itself apart. In every other species subjected to the trial, this strategy worked without fail. Even the strongest civilizations fractured when the mind was turned against itself. Fear and doubt spread like wildfire, and in the absence of certainty, paranoia consumed them. Leaders became tyrants. Friends became enemies. But once again, humanity did the impossible. The Dominion's mistake was assuming that humans would succumb to manipulation like every species before them. What they failed to understand was that humanity had spent centuries perfecting the art of deception, subterfuge, and psychological resilience against themselves. Humans had known lies for as long as they had known language. Their histories were riddled with propaganda, disinformation, and betrayals at every level of civilization. Wars have been fought, nations had risen and fallen, not by force of arms, but by force of perception. And so, when the Dominion sought to break them with falsehoods, humanity did what no species had ever done. They adapted. At first, the Dominion's false messages caused small fractures. A few outposts collapsed. Minor conflicts erupted. But within months, something fascinating happened. The humans began to reverse engineer the lies. They analyzed intercepted Dominion transmissions, cross-referenced their own experiences, and built methods to detect and dismantle misinformation. They tested messages for inconsistencies, created secret verification codes known only to trusted groups, and established layers of redundancy in communication to prevent widespread deception. Even more dangerously, they learned how to weaponize disinformation themselves. Within years, the humans had turned the Dominion's psychological warfare against them. Dominion drones intercepted false reports planted by humans, spreading fabricated intelligence about non-existent rebellions or internal struggles that didn't exist. Entire settlements faked their own destruction, leading the Dominion to believe they had eradicated key human strongholds, only for those same settlements to resurface elsewhere, stronger than before. The Dominion's analysts were confused. How? How had humanity countered a strategy that had crushed every species before them? The answer was chilling in its simplicity. Humans had spent their entire existence preparing for this without even realizing it. Every war, every political conflict, every act of espionage in their history had hardened them. They had been manipulating each other for millennia. By the time the Dominion had tried to deceive them, humanity had already mastered the art of the mind. But the Dominion had one last gambit. If doubt could not break humanity, then fear would. The next wave of psychological warfare was not subtle. The Dominion stopped interfering from the shadows and instead struck directly at the soul of human resilience. They fabricated distress calls, messages from Earth claiming it had been destroyed. They broadcast images of slaughtered human settlements, some real, some altered, designed to crush morale. They hijacked human communication networks, inserting footage of survivors begging for help before being abruptly cut off, their fates unknown. And the worst? They deployed the Phantom Fleet, a series of unmanned Dominion ships that appeared over human settlements, broadcasting only silence, before disappearing into the void. No attacks, no communication, just an ever-present reminder that death could come at any moment. The effects were devastating. Some humans fell into despair. Some turned on each other. There were suicides, betrayals, acts of desperation. For the first time since the trial began, the Dominion believed they had won. But then, humanity adapted again. They stopped believing in anything they could not confirm with their own eyes. They created strict truth protocols, ensuring that no information, no message, no distress call, no warning was acted upon unless verified through trusted, independent sources. They taught themselves not to fear the unknown, but to embrace it. Instead of collapsing under the weight of uncertainty, humanity became the uncertainty. And then, they did something even more terrifying. They hunted the hunters. On one particular planet, a barren wasteland where the Dominion had staged a false massacre, the surviving humans tracked the Dominion's observation drones. They captured them. They hacked them. And for the first time in history, the Dominion's own surveillance network became compromised. Within weeks, humans were intercepting real Dominion transmissions. Within months, they had begun feeding false intelligence back into the Dominion's own systems. Within years, they had turned the trial of endurance into their own proving ground, using the Dominion's psychological warfare as a training exercise for future conflicts. Humanity was no longer just surviving. They were evolving. And the Dominion, for the first time, realized they had made a mistake that could not be undone. They had underestimated humanity's mind. The trial of endurance was not breaking them. It was forging them into something far more dangerous than warriors. It was turning them into something the Dominion could not control, something that no empire in the galaxy was prepared for. The future. The Dominion believed they had taken everything from humanity. They had stripped them of their homeworld, their infrastructure, their technology. They had left them scattered across desolate, inhospitable worlds where survival alone should have been impossible. They had denied them trade, contact, and even hope. But the Dominion had underestimated something fundamental about humanity. They had not taken their will to create. The economy of the Dominion was vast, spanning thousands of worlds and trillions of inhabitants. It was meticulously controlled, its every transaction monitored, its systems of taxation and allocation perfected over millennia. No species had ever operated outside of its carefully structured trade networks. Not successfully, anyway. And yet humans did. The black markets were inevitable. At first, they were small, whispers in the dark, barter systems emerging between survivors. A knife traded for a piece of dried food. A salvaged Dominion power cell exchanged for a handful of purified water. These trades were desperate, born of necessity, and driven by survival. But desperation breeds ingenuity. And soon, barter alone was not enough. The first human currency was not made of metal or paper. It was something far more valuable: knowledge. Survivors began cataloging the environments they had been thrown into, mapping underground water reserves, identifying edible plant life, documenting weather cycles. On one barren world, a group of survivors cracked the composition of an otherwise toxic mineral, discovering it could be refined into a crude but effective antibiotic. The discovery was shared with other settlements, and in return, they received information on how to create insulation from volcanic rock, preventing deaths in the frozen exiles. Trade became more than just goods. It became a network of survival itself. But humans had always been more than survivors. They were builders. And so, the black markets expanded. On one prison world, where Dominion enforcers occasionally patrolled, humans learned to repurpose Dominion scrap into tools, creating workshops hidden beneath the rocky landscape. They repaired damaged machinery, learned how to reprogram Dominion salvage drones to perform simple tasks, and even built their own weapons, primitive, yes, but lethal enough to make enforcement squads wary. On another world, where Dominion waste was dumped, human scavengers recovered discarded Dominion technology, learning to strip it for useful components. Within years, they had built functional power grids, crude but effective, lighting up their underground sanctuaries when the Dominion had left them to live in darkness. And the more the Dominion tried to crush them, the stronger the network grew. At first, Dominion forces raided settlements suspected of trading goods. They destroyed crude forges, burned underground storerooms, executed those caught organizing markets. But for every black market they destroyed, 3 more rose in its place. The humans learned from every failed crackdown. They made their trade networks invisible, operating through shifting locations, using coded messages and false trails to deceive Dominion patrols. They used shell operations, traders who carried nothing but information, passing knowledge between settlements without physically carrying contraband. They infiltrated Dominion supply lines, bribing low-level functionaries with goods that were cheaper, more effective, and more readily available than official Dominion stores. And that was when the true shift happened. Because it wasn't just humans buying from the black markets anymore. It was Dominion citizens. It began with small transactions. A low-ranking Dominion soldier, tired of the rationed, synthetic food issued to him, discovered that a human-run trading post had access to real food, harvested from underground hydroponic farms, grown through sheer necessity. He made a purchase. A minor bureaucrat, struggling with long Dominion supply delays, found that human-forged tools were cheaper, stronger, and more reliable than those issued through official Dominion chains. A planetary governor, stationed on a fringe world, realized that his own officers were using human-engineered heating systems not officially sanctioned, but far more efficient than Dominion-issued alternatives. By the time the Dominion recognized the problem, the black markets were already embedded within their own economy. And then, something truly unthinkable happened. Human trade became so effective that entire Dominion colonies began shifting to human-supplied goods. Dominion-built tools were clunky, standardized, and expensive, designed for longevity rather than practicality. Human-built tools were specialized, efficient, and adaptable, built to solve immediate, real-world problems. Dominion rations were sterile and tasteless, mass-produced sustenance designed only to meet biological needs. Human-grown food was flavorful, varied, and nutritious, engineered out of necessity to maximize energy efficiency. And the Dominion's own economy began to feel the effects. The first reports were dismissed, claims that Dominion supply chains were losing money, that official trade networks were being bypassed, that lower-class Dominion citizens were smuggling in human-manufactured goods rather than buying from state-sanctioned suppliers. Then came the internal investigations. High-ranking officials were furious when they discovered that their own soldiers were actively purchasing human technology, crude, yes, but cheaper, easier to repair, and more effective in hostile environments. And the final revelation? Some Dominion manufacturers had begun secretly buying human designs, stealing human blueprints, replicating human ingenuity, and reselling it within the Dominion itself. For the first time, the Dominion realized that humanity was not just enduring. They were competing. The trial of endurance had never been designed to account for economic warfare. And yet, the humans had done the unthinkable. They had built a shadow empire within the Dominion's own borders. And it was growing stronger by the year. The Dominion tried to crush it. They deployed harsher penalties, executed smugglers, destroyed entire settlements caught engaging in trade. They ordered full-scale blockades on suspected black market hubs. And yet, no matter how many traders they killed, how many outposts they burned, they could not stop the market from growing. Because at its core, the black market was not built on individuals. It was built on necessity. The heart of the Dominion tried to crack down on human trade. The more Dominion citizens turned to it. It was cheaper, faster, more efficient, and it had one crucial advantage. It was built by people who understood scarcity, understood desperation, and understood how to thrive when the universe conspired against them. By the time the Dominion fully grasped the scale of their mistake, it was too late. Humanity was no longer just surviving in the trial of endurance. They had turned it into a proving ground for their own economy. The Dominion had tried to starve them of resources. Instead, humanity had created the single largest black market in Dominion history. And the empire that once sought to break them, it had become dependent on them instead. The Dominion still believed itself in control. It saw the black markets as a nuisance, a symptom of human persistence rather than a sign of real power. Even as Dominion citizens secretly turned to human goods, even as entire sectors whispered of human-made tools outperforming imperial standard equipment, the ruling elite dismissed it as irrelevant. But power does not always announce itself with warships or grand declarations. Sometimes, power grows in the shadows, threading itself through the fabric of a civilization until it can no longer be extracted. And by the time the Dominion realized what was happening, humanity was woven into the very structure of its empire. It started in the fringe worlds, the outermost planets where Dominion oversight was weakest. These were places where supply lines often failed, where Dominion governance was bureaucratic, inefficient, and corrupt. Governors hoarded resources, trade routes were slow, and official infrastructure was prone to collapse from sheer mismanagement. In those places, humanity did what it had always done best. It adapted. Small human-run settlements became critical hubs of survival, not just for humans, but for everyone. The black markets evolved, moving beyond simple trade in weapons, food, and survival gear. Now, they supplied solutions. Dominion officials, frustrated with endless shortages and bureaucratic red tape, began relying on human engineers to fix failing infrastructure. Human traders, more efficient than imperial distributors, started delivering supplies faster than official channels could. At first, it was quiet cooperation. A Dominion officer would hire a human-run labor crew to repair a collapsed factory under the table, simply because they could get it done in days instead of months. A minor administrator would look the other way as human-built water filtration systems cropped up in Dominion-controlled cities, because they worked better than the state-issued models. And then it became systemic. On dozens of worlds, Dominion officials were unknowingly making themselves reliant on human ingenuity. Entire planetary economies were shadow-run by human trade networks. Agricultural yields increased, manufacturing became more efficient, and security forces found their Dominion-standard weapons subtly modified with human-design improvements. Unofficial, unapproved, but undeniably effective. By the time Dominion intelligence recognized what was happening, humanity had already become irreplaceable. The Dominion's first instinct was to root out the problem. Investigators were sent to fringe worlds to purge human influence, but what they found shocked them. They expected black markets and illegal workshops. They found fully functional societies, running parallel to Dominion rule. They expected crude settlements. They found cities. They expected desperate survivors. They found organized governments, trade systems, and networks of cooperation stronger than what the Dominion had established. And most disturbingly, they found humans integrated with Dominion citizens at every level. Not just as workers, not just as traders, but as advisors, strategists, leaders. It was no longer just humans surviving in the Dominion shadow. It was the Dominion beginning to function on human innovation. For the first time in its history, The Empire faced a civilization that had embedded itself so deeply that removing it would cause more harm than good. And the realization struck like a slow-moving storm. Humanity was no longer an outside force. They were part of the Empire itself. The Dominion panicked. Laws were passed, declaring any non-Dominion entity operating outside official channels to be illegal. Crackdowns began. Leaders suspected of working with human groups were executed. But it was too late. Removing humanity was no longer an option because humanity wasn't separate anymore. Their traders supplied too many vital industries. Their engineers held the keys to Dominion infrastructure. Their food production and water systems kept entire worlds from starving. And when Dominion officers came to tear it all down, even their own people resisted. On one world, when a human-run power plant was ordered to shut down, Dominion civilians protested. Not for ideology, but because they needed the energy to survive. On another, when Dominion security forces tried to arrest a human trade leader, the local governor refused the order, warning that the economic damage would be too great. And then, the final, undeniable sign of change came. Dominion elite families began hiring humans as advisors. In the upper echelons of the Empire, where politics and power were played like a great game, Dominion rulers were pragmatic above all else. They could not ignore what was happening. And when they looked beyond their biases, they saw what was obvious. Humans had done the impossible. They had not conquered. They had not rebelled. They had woven themselves into the Empire so thoroughly that removing them would be self-destruction. And so, without ever declaring war, without ever raising an army, without ever demanding a seat at the table, humanity had done something far greater. They had become the foundation of the Empire's future. The Dominion did not acknowledge their mistake aloud. That was not their way. Instead, the purges stopped. The restrictions quietly lifted. The black markets were no longer raided, but subtly absorbed into the official economy. Human innovations began appearing in Dominion-sanctioned technology, never credited, never openly acknowledged, but present nonetheless. And most importantly, new Dominion policies were introduced, allowing trusted non-Dominion entities to hold minor administrative positions, a technicality that gave humans direct influence over the Empire's future. In public, the Dominion still considered humans a lesser species. But behind closed doors, they had already become something more. They were no longer just survivors. They were builders, architects, essential, and the most powerful rulers in the Empire. Those who had once believed that humanity would crumble under the trial of endurance now whispered among themselves in uneasy voices, because they saw what was coming. Humanity had not just endured the trial. They had won it, not as conquerors, not as warriors, but as the hidden hand shaping the future of an empire that had tried to break them. And the greatest irony? The Dominion had built the trial of endurance as a test of worthiness, a crucible that determined which species could earn their place in the Empire. And humanity had passed it in a way no species ever had before. Not by force, not by submission, but by becoming the Empire's very foundation. The trial was over, and humanity was here to stay. The Dominion did not admit mistakes. It did not apologize. It did not correct itself. It corrected others. For centuries, the Empire had ruled with absolute certainty. Its structure was eternal, its methods perfected, its authority unchallenged. No species had ever altered the Dominion's path. Those who resisted were crushed. Those who obeyed were assimilated. And yet, humanity had done something far more dangerous than rebellion or submission. They had changed the Dominion from within. They had been cast into the trial of endurance, expected to break, to collapse, to vanish as so many before them had. But instead, they had woven themselves into the fabric of the Empire itself, through trade, through ingenuity, through necessity. They had become irreplaceable, and the Dominion could not accept that. So they decided to end it. The decision came from the highest ranks of the Dominion, whispered in dark chambers where only the most powerful voices were heard. Humanity was a mistake, a virus that had spread too far, too deep, If allowed to continue, they would reshape the empire in their image, not by force, but by influence. They would make the Dominion dependent on them. And that was unacceptable. So the Exarch and the High Ministers issued the order. A complete, coordinated purge. No trials, no warnings, no time to prepare. Within a single cycle, every known human settlement, every integrated faction, every trace of human presence within the Dominion's borders would be erased. It would be surgical, efficient, total. The mistake would be undone. The Dominion struck without warning. Warships emerged from hyperspace over human-run colonies. Orbital bombardments rained down without hesitation. Settlements that had taken decades to build were reduced to nothing within hours. Every outpost, every black market hub, every hidden city, targets were already marked. The Dominion had been watching, waiting, and when the order was given, they unleashed annihilation. But what they found was not helpless victims. What they found was a civilization that had spent centuries preparing for the inevitable. Because humanity had always known this day would come. From a moment they had first understood the nature of the trial of endurance, humanity had realized a singular truth. The Dominion would never accept them. Not as equals, not as allies, not as partners. And so, even as they built, even as they traded, even as they integrated into the empire, they prepared for war. Not a war of conquest, a war of consequences, a war the Dominion could not win. The first fleet that bombarded a human colony expected a slaughter. What they found instead was a ghost city, empty, silent, already abandoned. The Dominion's forces had fired upon shadows. The second fleet met a communications blackout, not on humanity's side, but on theirs. Their warships' systems failed, their networks were hijacked, their targeting computers scrambled. Dominion commanders shouted orders into silence. And then a single message appeared on every Dominion screen, every comms relay, every console connected to the Empire's network. It was not a threat. It was not a declaration of war. It was a warning. You tried to break us. You made us stronger. You tried to erase us. You made us indispensable. You think this is your empire? No, this is ours. You just haven't realized it yet. And across the Dominion, systems began to fail. Because the trade networks humans had built, the Dominion relied on them now. The factories that ran efficiently, they were running on human-engineered improvements. The supply chains that fed entire Dominion sectors, controlled by human logistics. And with a single command, humanity shut it all down. Entire Dominion worlds plunged into chaos. Food shortages, manufacturing collapses, infrastructure failures. The Dominion, for all its might, had never faced an enemy like this. Humanity did not fight with ships. They fought with economics, with trade, with knowledge. And the Dominion suddenly understood. They were the ones who had become dependent. Humanity had not infiltrated the Empire. They had become the Empire's beating heart. And now, with a flick of a switch, they could stop it from beating. The Exarch tried to save face. They declared that the attacks had been a miscommunication, a rogue military operation gone wrong. But the truth was obvious. The Dominion had tried to wipe out humanity. And now, the Empire could not function without them. So, in the greatest act of hypocrisy in Dominion history, the ruling elite offered negotiations. Not because they wanted peace, but because they had no other choice. There was no war. There was no treaty. There was only the inevitable. Humanity did not ask for seats in the Dominion's high councils. They did not need them. They did not demand sovereignty. They had already taken it, because the truth was undeniable. The Dominion no longer ruled the galaxy. Humanity did, not through war, not through violence, but by enduring, by outlasting, by outthinking, by outbuilding. And by the time the Dominion realized it had lost, it was already too late. They could either adapt to the new reality or crumble under the weight of their own mistakes. And so, without a single battle fought, without a single planet seized, humanity became the foundation of the future. Not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as the architects of a new empire. One that would never make the mistake of underestimating endurance again. The Dominion no longer ruled. It still existed, its banners still flew, and its rulers still held their courts in the great halls of the Prime Nexus. But the illusion of absolute control, the unshakable certainty of its supremacy, was gone, because humanity had done what no species had ever done before. They had not conquered through war. They had not overthrown the empire in rebellion. They had endured, and in doing so, they had become the foundation upon which the Dominion now stood. The transition was not immediate. The Dominion did not crumble overnight. There were still sectors where the old ways held firm, where Dominion leaders clung to their arrogance, pretending they were still the undisputed masters of the galaxy. But they all knew the truth. The moment humanity had shut down the Empire's infrastructure, when supply lines collapsed, when planets went dark, when industry ground to a halt, the illusion of control had shattered. And the reality was clear. The Dominion could not function without humanity. For centuries, the trial of endurance had been designed to test species, to force them to prove their worth or to perish. Humanity had taken that test and rewritten the rules entirely. They had passed, not by bending to the Dominion's will, but by making themselves indispensable. Now, the Dominion had a choice. Adapt or die. The silent revolution. The Dominion did not surrender, because there was nothing left to surrender. Instead, the changes came quietly, like the tide reshaping the shore. New policies were passed, integrating select non-Dominion entities into advisory roles. Human-run trade networks, once considered illegal, were now officially sanctioned. Human-designed technologies, once dismissed as crude, were now implemented across entire sectors. And, most tellingly, Dominion officials stopped asking how things worked, because they already knew the answer. Humans were running them, from the smallest bureaucratic offices to the grand trade councils that dictated interstellar commerce. Humanity had embedded itself so deeply into the Empire's structure that even the Dominion's own citizens began to see them as part of the system. A silent empire, unspoken, unwritten, but undeniable. The most profound change was the slowest one, the shift in thought, in perception. A generation passed, then another. Young Dominion scholars, raised in a world where human engineers designed their cities, where human economists shaped the trade routes, where human-built infrastructure powered their homes, began to ask a question that would have been unthinkable centuries before. Were they ever truly lesser? Because to them, humanity was not an outside force, not an anomaly, not a mistake that had been allowed to persist. Humanity was part of the Empire now. No, more than that. Humanity was the Empire. The Dominion had once believed itself eternal. But the truth was simple. It had already changed. There was no grand declaration, no moment of conquest, no formal acknowledgement of what had happened. But the proof was everywhere. The old Dominion laws, written in a time when humans were seen as little more than pests to be exterminated, were slowly erased from history. The trial of endurance, once a tool to break civilizations, was quietly discontinued, because its greatest failure had remade the Empire itself. And in the deepest halls of the Prime Nexus, in chambers where no human had ever set foot, the most powerful figures of the Dominion finally admitted the truth they had spent centuries denying. They had lost, not to war, not to rebellion, but to something far more powerful, to endurance, to innovation, to the simple, relentless refusal to die. The Dominion was still vast. Its fleets still patrolled the stars. Its rulers still called themselves the masters of the known galaxy. But in the shadows of that power, the true architects of the future had already taken control. Humanity did not demand seats in the Dominion's grand councils. They did not need them. They did not ask for titles or formal rule. Because in the end, what did titles matter? The Dominion could call itself whatever it wished. It no longer mattered. Because the truth was known. Humanity had endured. And in doing so, they had done what no species had ever done before. They had survived the trial. They had won the Empire. And now, they would build its future. Not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as the ones who had proven, beyond all doubt, that no force in the universe was stronger than those who refused to break. Because in the end, humanity had done the one thing the Dominion had never thought possible. They had not simply survived. They had become eternal.